Death, Desire and Incapacity, the 20th chapter of Aurobindo's Life Divine. Hello, this is Chris speaking. Wake up with another video about Aurobindo's The Life Divine. This time chapter 20 about death, desire and incapacity. We've seen in the last chapter about life that death is not really something we have to be afraid of, because death is not the opposite of life, but death is a part of life. It's a transformation. It's a manifestation of life force itself, and it has to be within this limited context of the material reality. It's a necessity. Without this, illusion of matter could not work. And also it would be too static. There could be no progress without death. It's part of the whole time experience. Forms have to be able to change. And before a change can happen, death has to happen first. This is the law of death. There is no embodiment without death. There are two impulses here at work. There's the impulse of infinite division and of infinite aggregation in material existence. Division and aggregation, they constitute the universe. They are the basic duality. And the impulse or the attempt of the individual to aggrandize and maintain itself is called desire. The individual has the illusion of being separate, and within this illusion, the individual wants to attain wholeness again, unity again, and at first it does it by aggrandizing itself, by pretending or desiring to be more than it is, desiring to be the whole. This is called desire. The problem is that usually these individuals with the delusion of separateness try to make themselves whole by imagining that they themselves are God, are omnipotent. Well, in actual fact, it's a desire to return to the wholeness, to the infinite, to lose the individuality. But you can only see that this is the actual aim after having tried to walk this path of megalomania first. So all desire actually comes from a desire to reunite with the infinity, with the absolute again, but on a detour. Every desire is a desire to aggrandize itself, oneself, and to be more than one actually is, to try to be more than an aspect and a drop. He writes, the impulse to realize the secret of consciousness is the spur of the cosmic divine, the lust of the embodied self within every individual creature. In the end, you will see that everything that happens within you, within what you thought was an individual, a separate self, is actually some impulse of the divine. He talks about laws here, laws within this context of the material universe, the law of hunger, the law of love, the law of division, the law of unity, the law of death, and the law of immortality. And this desire, it starts with the law of hunger. It starts as a hunger for something more. It wants something, but it doesn't know what. And then, in the end, it goes towards unity and immortality and fulfills its destiny. Life is an infinite force in the terms of the finite. Without that presence behind it, it no longer... Everything is just the omnipotent force of the infinite. Without that presence behind it, no least single movement in the cosmos can happen. So there's of course also a limited freedom somehow trying to be as unlimited as possible by allowing all kinds of nonsense. Also, too much hunger, too much lust to aggrandize yourself, which can lead to suffering. Part of the game it has to be. First is a will to possess, to have everything, to own everything. And later this will change into a will to be possessed, to return to the unity without cravings, just following the will of the divine. It starts with incapacity, the feeling of incapacity, the feeling of lack, the feeling of separation, the feeling that there's something missing, that there must be more, and the misunderstanding that you have to try to improve, that you have to gather and be more, that you have to do anything. And later you will realize you don't have to do anything, you just have to realize that this illusion of separateness is an illusion and that you're part of the whole and that you can follow the divine force. And then your mind can be in unison with the supermind, with the divine. And then you can participate in the omniscience and omnipotence and all-determining power. Then you're a willing tool, a willing servitor to the divine consciousness. You're not an imposter anymore who wants to be a god. You realize that you have been, you are, and you have been the divine all along. The individual life force, he writes, is an energy of individualizing an ignorant mind. Mind has fallen from knowledge of its own supermind. It has forgotten, so to say. Yeah? It has forgotten that it is part of the supermind also. This is a very short but very important chapter. All these things, death, desire, incapacity, they're very important for us. They determine a lot of our life and how we experience this life as positive or negative. The struggle of limited forces increasing their capacity, by that struggle under the driving impetus of instinctive or conscious desire, is therefore the first law of life, he writes. As with desire, so with strife. There must be a wrestling of these forces, which are all one, of course. All these forces belong to the one absolute divine. But in this material universe, with this separate and individualized delusion of matter and time, these forces must struggle. Everything that seems to happen is a divine interchange. And all strife is replaced by love, by cosmic self-affirmation. What we see as death and suffering and pain and injustice, they're basically stumblings. They're parts of the divine stumbling blindly through the darkness and trying to find the light again, trying to find the unity again. And what we experience as failure is part of it. It has to be part of it. Otherwise it would be 100% set game and there would be nothing to learn here. The strange thing is that the only thing that is to learn here is that you're actually part of the divine, that you actually are the divine, that you're not an individual, that you're not separate. But somehow it is necessary for the Absolute to cast a few aspects of itself into ignorance and then to find their way back to itself, to remember who they really are. All cravings, all desires that we have, all feeling of incapacity, of something missing, are just this yearning to go back to the whole, to the absolute infinite divine. Desire is the lever, he writes, by which the divine life principle effects its end of self-affirmation in the universe, and the attempt to extinguish it in the interests of inertia is a denial of the divine life principle, a will not to be, which is necessarily ignorance. For one cannot cease to be individually except by being infinitely. Desire too can only cease rightly by becoming the desire of the infinite and satisfying itself with a supernal fulfillment of infinite satisfaction and the all-possessing bliss of the infinite. So there's also the chaos between the will to be and the will not to be. A constant change, a constant chaos. And this constant chaos is actually a seeking to affirm life, the universe, the divine, the absolute, is trying to affirm its own immortality. It's trying to feel itself, to experience itself, as from the outside. But there is no outside. The divine is everything. So it has to create ignorance to be able to see itself, to perceive itself as if it were from the outside. That's a bit crazy, of course. That's why it seems to be like chaos. It seems to be like destruction. It seems to be like pain and suffering and injustice. And all these individual illusions, they struggle with each other. There's not an agreement. He writes, behind every act of the individual, however weak, however futile, however stumbling, there must be the whole superconscious and subconscious presence of the infinite omnipotent force. Without it, no single movement can happen in the cosmos. So the force is always there, even if it pretends to be incapacitated, unconscious, ignorant. But life itself delivers itself out of this form and begins to evolve towards conscious mind. So for Sri Aurobindo, it's very clear that there is an evolution, that there is a plan behind all this. The exact outcome and the exact mechanics of this plan or game we don't know, but we know its general aim is evolution and self-affirmation. It's not about a struggle to survive, it's a struggle for perfection. Of course, the divine is already perfect, but it wants to experience this. And the divine is infinite, but it wants to experience it, and so on. It's a way of self-expression. How does an infinitely large, powerful, absolute being express itself? And this is what we will talk about in the next chapter, chapter 21, the ascent of life. Thank you for watching. Thank you for joining me on Facebook or Patreon, subscribing, hitting the bell button. Thank you very much. See you soon.